is, as you hopefully see on the screen, custom content migrations to Drupal 8. And it's a nice, gentle overview of the different ways to get content and configuration into Drupal 8. The migration system is a big part of Drupal 8. It's quite a bit different than in previous core versions of Drupal. So I thought what I'd do today is give everyone an overview of the more traditional ways of getting stuff into your Drupal 8 site, kind of breaking them down, pros and cons. And then for the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, we're actually going to do a custom content migration. We're going to build one. Well, it's already built, I should say. We're going to review its code, and then we're actually going to run it and see how it works. So that's the plan. So I guess what we'll do is I'm going to keep an eye on the questions. So a lot of people said, yes, everything sounds good, looks great, fantastic. All right, so I'll keep an eye on the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. I know you can't, there's no audio on your end, but that's okay. But yeah, so we'll just get rolling and let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go from there. So hopefully everyone gets a lot out of this. Here we go. So who am I? I am Mike Anello. I'm with Drupal Easy, Anello Consulting as well. It's the same company. We are a Drupal consulting and training firm based in, right now, beautiful, sunny Florida. Probably the one thing we're best known for, well, maybe two things. I do the Drupal Easy podcast with some other co-hosts. So you may have heard my voice before doing that. And we've been doing that. I think we might be one of the longest running podcasts, Drupal related podcasts out there. I think we're on episode somewhere around 190, something like that. Record every other week, and yeah, so you can check us out there at drupaleasy.com. The other thing we're known for is we have one of the few long-form Drupal training programs around. It's a 12-week online training program. It's called Drupal Career Online. We've been doing it for about 5 years. We got a class going right now, as a matter of fact, of students from all around the U.S., although we're not limited to just the U.S., but that has typically been where our students have come from. So you can learn more about that at drupaleasy.com as well. I am Ultimike pretty much everywhere, Drupal.org as well as Twitter and pretty much everywhere else. I was actually a contributor to the Drupal 8 migration system. So a lot of what I've learned is came directly from that. So let's kind of, let's wrap our arms around this whole migration, thing. Let's talk about Migration Basics 101. A migration basically looks like this, and this is definitely not Drupal specific. This, take any software project that needs to be migrated from one place to another, and it generally looks like this, where you have and I'm going to use the term database. You have a source database, but in reality, that source can be a static HTML site. It could be a pile of XML files. It could be, just about anything. But traditionally, when we're talking about Drupal migration, generally we're migrating from a database. So generally, you have a source database and you have a destination database, which, since we're talking about Drupal 8, the destination is obviously going to be Drupal 8. And then in between the two of them, we have a series of operations that has to take place in order to get the data from the source to the destination. We have to get the data. There has to be some mechanism to query the source database in order to get the data that we need to be migrated. Then we need to map the data. So we need to map a particular field on the source database to a particular field on the destination database. Maybe in the process, we need to massage the data, and that's where we would process the data. So we get a piece of data from the source database, and maybe we need to massage it a little bit in order for it to fit the new format that's in the destination database. And once we process it, then we can set it, meaning there's some operation we perform that saves that piece of data to the destination database. This pipeline, and pipeline is the word that we used quite a bit when we're talking about the D8 migrate system. But this pipeline, and understanding this pipeline is key to understanding Drupal 8 migration. You have a source and a destination. These are both represented as PHP objects in Drupal core. We have getters and setters, which are mainly handled by the source and destination objects. And then we've got, a pipeline in between. And each piece of that pipeline can be its own object, could be a process, could be a mapping, could be something like that. But there's a pipeline between the source and the destination that has a number of operations. And the cool thing is with Drupal 8, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself already, which I tend to do. But the cool thing with Drupal 8 is that pipeline can be controlled 100% through configuration, meaning all of the bits and pieces are already there. They're already written in Drupal core. A lot of times we just need to assemble them. Think of it like Drupal core, the Migrate and Drupal core gives you a bunch of Lego pieces, and you just need to put them in the right order to get data from your source to your destination. And putting those pieces in the right order can be as simple as configuration, and that's exactly what the example we're going to walk through later on in this webinar is going to show. So understanding this pipeline is key. Unfortunately, when you're migrating from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 for that matter to Drupal 8, you've got a lot more than one pipeline. You have pipelines for users, you have pipelines for vocabularies, you have pipelines for content types, you have pipelines for configuration. So you can have quite a few different migrations going on. In fact, in a simple D6 to D8 upgrade, there's well over 60. And when I say simple, I mean not much more than Drupal 6 core plus CCK. So the number of individual migrations can increase pretty darn quickly. Each of these configurations is going to have a configuration file. Since we're talking Drupal 8, that's going to be a YAML file that defines it. And if your D6 site has a large number of content types, a lot of information architecture, as well as a lot of, enabled modules, you could have, quite a few migrations. So this can get complex pretty fast. So we're not going to get too complex in the next hour, but we're going to try and keep it simple so we understand the basics. So remember, as we move forward, we have a source, a destination, and a pipeline in between. All right, so let's talk specifically about what are the various ways of getting data into Drupal 8. The way I look at it, I've kind of broken it up into 4 buckets. There's 4 different ways that we can migrate data into Drupal 8. There might be more than 4, but generally, I'll say there's going to be 4. And keep in mind, when we're talking about migrating into Drupal 8, we're talking about content and configuration. So those of you who have used the Migrate module in Drupal 7, the Migrate module in Drupal 7 was really just confined to content. The Drupal 8 Migrate API, much like previous Drupal core versions of the update scripts, is designed to migrate configuration and content. So what I mean by configuration is you can take a Drupal 6 site that has content types defined, run it through the default Drupal 8 migrate script, and those content types will be generated in Drupal 8 as well. So that's something, if you were using the Migrate module to go from D6 to D7 and you were writing custom migrations, you would actually have to manually recreate your information architecture on D7. But the Migrate module in D8 does quite a bit more than it did in D7, where it will migrate both content and configuration. And you can imagine, if you think about it, migrating configuration is especially tricky because of dependencies. Just as a brief example, if you have a content type with 5 fields, before you can actually migrate the configuration of that content type, you have to migrate the configuration of each of those fields. So one thing is dependent on another. So that's where migrations can get really tricky, is with configuration dependencies, or I should just say dependencies. Okay, so let's talk about those 4 general ways of getting data in. I've given them fun names. We have House of Pain, and we're going to go into details into each of these in a second. the whole enchilada, migration by subtraction, and then migration satisfaction. So that's kind of, might be able to guess what each of these refers to right now, but let's dive into each of them here for a couple minutes. House of Pain, manually migrate content, copying and pasting, not using the Drupal 8 Migrate API. Why would you ever want to possibly do this? Well, for some sites that have a limited amount of content, it makes perfect sense. Let me just put up all these bullet points here. If you only have, let's say, 100 nodes on your site, how long would it take someone to manually move those 100 nodes? Versus how long would it take someone to write a migration to migrate those 100 nodes? You're probably going to pay the person less money who's doing it manually versus a developer who's writing you a custom content migration. Plus, as you're manually moving them, you have the opportunity to do real-time content auditing and editing as well. So there are definitely use cases, and I've actually done a couple of them since Drupal 8 has been released, where we've had on the order of in the low hundreds. I don't think I've done anything more, I've been on a project where there's been more than like 200 or 300 nodes that we ended up manually migrating. Any project I've worked on that has more than a couple hundred nodes, we've generally, written migrations for it. But if you can train someone to do it, it's probably not a bad idea, and it's worth considering from a financial standpoint. The whole enchilada is basically using the Drupal 8 core upgrade path. So this is where, this is what's built into Drupal 8, and we'll see more details about this in a few minutes. But this is where literally you point your Drupal 8 site, or you point the migrate UI in your Drupal 8 site, add a Drupal 6 database, and hit a couple buttons, and it migrates everything in, content plus configuration. Now, granted, it's only going to migrate in what it knows about. So Drupal 8 Migrate and Core will migrate everything from Drupal 6 core and Drupal 7 core, plus CCK fields, particularly link, email, the more well-used CCK fields. If you have like panels on your D6 or D7 site, the Drupal core upgrade path will not migrate in your panel sets. Views is not supported in that upgrade path either. But anything that's in Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 core and CCK in Drupal 6 will be part of kind of the core upgrade path. And it's relatively easy. It's all just done through the UI. The big downside of this is if you have information architecture in your D6 site that you don't like, you're basically migrating it to your D8 site. So it does not allow for refactoring. And for me, that's kind of a big deal. This is kind of a deal breaker for me. This is what I've kind of, this is why I tend to shy away from this one, because most people, when they look back at a Drupal 6 site that was written, 6, 8, 10 years ago, maybe not 10, but 6 to 8 years ago, the organization has changed. The way they operate their website has changed. You probably don't want to stick with the same information architecture that you designed, that many years ago. You probably want to refactor it and take it, to be able to take advantage of all the new great Drupal 8 modules. If you've got a very simple brochure site, maybe it's okay. But the big downside for me is that it does not allow for refactoring. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. Migration by subtraction is a really interesting one. I have not used it other than evaluating it, but it's a modified Drupal 8 core upgrade. And what this allows you to do is kind of configure a full whole enchilada style upgrade, but then allows you to modify the migrations that Drupal 8 core upgrade provide. So it allows for limited customization. The cons behind it come back to those configuration dependencies. Because you're dealing with so many migrations, with all of the migrations that the Drupal 8 core upgrade provides, if you start, if you think that you'd like to remove some of those migrations, you could very quickly fall into dependency hell, where you are removing migrations that other migrations depend on, and then your migrations don't run. So I found that managing those dependencies tends to be the trickiest aspect of this. So while it does allow some customization, if you really want to do a full-on refactoring of your information architecture, I'm not sure this is the best solution. I think this is okay if you just need to do some tweaks here and there, but if you want to do a full-on refactoring, I think this next migration satisfaction method is really the way to go. And this is the one I prefer, and it's full custom. It's basically writing your own. And one of the goals of this webinar is basically for me to tell you and to demonstrate it's not that scary. Right now it's scary because you don't know it, or you've never used it. And it seems like it's a whole new thing, which granted it is a whole new thing. But if I, in the next 42 minutes, can take some of that nervousness away and give you some confidence that custom migrations aren't that bad, then I'm going to consider that a win. So what are the pros? You get what you need. You're only migrating what you want. You modify it or refactor it as you need it. And because you're writing the migrations yourself, you can fully refactor whatever you need. The downside is you've got to learn it, right? And the way I look at it is, this is our community's migration system now. In previous versions of Drupal core, there was the upgrade path into Drupal 6 or Drupal 7, and that was completely different than the migrate module. Well, we got smart in Drupal 8, and now it's the migrate module everywhere. So the migrate module is part of core, so that's what we use for these upgrade paths, but it's also what we use for just general migration projects. So it's, you kind of get 2 for 1. If you learn it, you know how to do both. And it's not as scary as you think. It really isn't. Okay, so here are the 4 again. So House of Pain, full manual, the whole enchilada, which is basically the upgrade path. Migration by subtraction is taking the upgrade path and making some modifications to it, maybe removing some migrations. And the migration satisfaction is where we kind of put our tool belt on and we build the whole thing ourselves. All right, so no questions yet. Wow, I must be telling you guys everything you want to know. I'm going to take a sip here. All right, so let's go into our various 4 types of migrations and get into a little bit more details. And we're going to do a demo on the last one, migration satisfaction. Oh, thank you, Ed. That's very nice. Always good to get feedback. Okay, so House of Pain, the manual way. So, how do we normally do this? And this isn't necessarily, a Drupal thing. This is, if you're migrating from one system to another, generally you want to be able to wrap your arms around the problem, right? You want to be able to get your content inventory. You need to train the people who are actually going to be doing it. And depending on what the organization looks like, maybe they're authors, maybe they're writers, maybe they're editors, maybe they're junior developers, who knows? But you've got to kind of train them on, this is where you get the content from, this is how we want to audit it and edit it, and this is where it goes on the new site. So you kind of have to teach them that manual pipeline. And then you kind of just, as a developer, you just back away and kind of let them do it. Again, depending on how many nodes or how many pieces of content, I should say, you might have vocabularies and users and other types of entities. This could be a short process or a longer process. I will say, kind of as an aside, I am a big proponent of whenever you're building a new Drupal site, regardless of the version, I actually like to do some of this manual migration very early on in the process, almost in like the prototype stage. So you build out your content types and all of your entities in D8, and then I normally ask the client, find some of your authors or editors and manually enter some content into the new site using the new forms, the new add forms, and just see if there is, see if we're missing anything, if there's any information architecture that needs to be switched. there's good value in that. So here I got some questions coming in, so let me look at some of these. Suzanne is saying, oh, excuse me 1 second, hang on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. My dog was complaining about being outside. So Suzanne, how's migration from right to left, left to right sites, all CSS and Drupal 8 is written different for RTL? I think that's more of a theming question, Suzanne. I don't think there's any difference from a migration standpoint for right to left and left to right sites. That's definitely not something I cover in this, but from a data standpoint, I don't think there's a difference.
That would mostly be down to your Drupal theme,
right?
Especially
Exactly.
for Drupal 8. And
yep.
For the second question, as long as you've got a registration link for this, you will get an email when the videos go live. So.
Yep. Okay. Very good. Thank you for that. So that answers Wendy's question. Is there a standard template you prefer to use for the inventory process? Molly, no, I don't have one. I tend to just use a Google spreadsheet, to be honest. I've seen there's a bunch of them out there. If you search for Drupal content inventory template, I think you'll probably see some shops have posted theirs. I tend to customize mine for each client depending on my client's level of technical savvy, for lack of a better phrase. If they have, if the client or my contact with the client has a strong technical background, if they understand database normalization and, I can talk to them about content types and fields, and I can create a very different content inventory document than if, they're just focused on pages. So I tend to customize them. Oh, my friend Doug Van. Hey, Doug, how are you? Okay, so we'll just keep on moving forward here. So the whole enchilada. This is the Drupal 8 core upgrade path, which, as I mentioned, is now built on D8 Migrate. So you start with the empty Drupal, well, this should be 8.2 site now. I need to update my slide. Enable, the Migrate and Migrate Drupal and Migrate Drupal UI modules. Those come with, those are all in Drupal core. They're all marked as experimental as of this moment, although we are trying to move them out of the get rid of that experimental tab because they're pretty good right now. There's a couple issues that we're trying to get resolved before we move them out of experimental, but they're all in Drupal 8 core. And then you go to /upgrade on your site, on your D8 site, and you'll see something. Well, here, then you click the buttons, but this is the upgrade page right here, and it really couldn't be simpler. You point to your Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 site, provide Drupal 8 with your legacy database credentials, as well as a path to your legacy site's files directory. And the cool thing is about, with these migrations is generally the source database does not get modified. Basically, the Drupal 8 site, the Migrate module reaches over, grabs a bunch of data, migrates it all into the Drupal 8 site, and your Drupal 6 site is still there. It's just chugging along. Unlike past core migrations, it would actually transmogrify your Drupal 6 database into a Drupal 7 database. That doesn't happen anymore. We're taking data from the source and moving it into the destination, which is your Drupal 8 site. So the whole enchilada, the Migrate UI, is pretty straightforward. But keep in mind, when you run the whole enchilada, you're running all of the migrations. So any of those bad decisions you made when you were building that Drupal 6 site, you are moving to your Drupal 8 site. And let's see, Casey has a question. Okay, let's see. I know when I am migrating content type A that are related to B, I can make stubs of content and update them later. Where I get in trouble is when I'm migrating content A that's related to B and content C, what to do then? I know that when I'm migrating A related to B, I can make stubs. Oh, okay, so I think you pasted your question in. Yeah, and you're kind of describing, that's a nice description of dependency hell, is what I was referring to. Um, yeah, I think, with stuff like that, it's a matter of, there's still stubbing. There's definitely stubbing that's built into a D8 migrate. Um, your question isn't really related to the whole enchilada right now, so that's more of a custom migration question, I think. And so I'll just give the simple answer, which is basically you can set your migrations to run in a particular order so that all of the dependencies are run before the things that are dependent on them. So it's just a matter of putting them in the right order when you're running them. Okay, so let's talk about addition by subtraction here. So again, start with the Drupal 8. In this case, I'll say 8.2 site. We're going to enable migrate and migrate Drupal. Again, those are in core. But then we're also going to do some contrib modules, migrate, upgrade, and migrate plus. And what these contrib modules allow us to do is basically run a migrate upgrade, which is the whole enchilada from Drush, but we use this configure only switch. So early on in the webinar, I basically said that most migrations are configuration only, where you can write them with YAML files. So when you run a drush migrate upgrade dash configure only, this will actually just write out, it will generate those configuration files but not run them. So you get all your configuration files, and then you can take all those configuration files, you can export them into a custom module, and then you can modify them or remove configurations if you want. So it's kind of like a middle ground where the whole enchilada will, when you hit that go button, it will generate all of your configurations and then immediately run them. What this method allows you to do is generate those configurations, those migration configurations, and then gives you the opportunity to tweak them and mess with them. And then after you mess with them, then you run them. So there's actually a really good article on drupalize.me about this from back in June. And what I'll do is, I think if I put that link in the chat, Daniel, will everybody see that? I'm going to hope to see. Yeah, entire audience. Good. All right, so I just put that link in there. So this article really kind of walks you through this addition by subtraction. And I will also say, I believe drupalize.me, I don't know if it's this weekend or it might be over next weekend, they are making all of their Drupal 8 migration videos free for a weekend. I don't know if it might be this weekend, it might be next weekend, but I know it's right around now. So shout out to those guys. They did a great job on those videos, and the fact that we can watch them, for free for the next, well, for a small period of time at least, is really generous of them. All right, a couple questions here. Migrate API uses an ETL extract transform load. That's correct, Hammond. You're basically describing the pipeline in different words for me. Appreciate that. And Siddhartha, hopefully I pronounced your name right. Does the migration API also consider proxy settings to connect to an old D6 site database? I'm not 100% sure of the answer to that. I'm going to actually show you in a few minutes that one of the ways to provide that connection information, at least for a custom migration, is through the settings.php file. And I'm actually going to show that as part of my demo. And, oh, thank you, Amy June. So it is this weekend. So those free drupalize.me videos are this weekend. So cool. Okay, wow, it's early. I know Amy June's on the west coast of the US, so thanks for getting up early. Hopefully you got some caffeine. Okay. So this is what a addition by subtraction ends up looking like, where you may not be running all of the migrations. You likely gotten rid of a few, and then the little items in red are where you may have modified it or provided some tweaks in those configurations. And again, for me, the big potential issue I see with addition by subtraction is if you get rid of some of these migration configurations that are actually dependencies of another configuration. So a little bit of danger there, but if you know what you're doing, you could probably, it's probably not a bad way to go. And now we get to kind of the whole point. So this is why this is kind of where I think we should all be thinking, maybe not immediately, but at least in the long term, is migration satisfaction. Again, start with a Drupal 8.2 or current Drupal core site. Enable migrate, migrate Drupal, which are part of core, migrate tools and migrate plus, which are in contrib. Build your Drupal 8 site, meaning ignore your old information architecture. Build your site the way it should be built today. Take advantage of all the cool new entity types. A lot of people love the paragraphs module. Take advantage of that. Build your site the way it should be built. Let go of all the mistakes in information architecture that you made with your previous sites. Build out the information architecture, and then figure out, and maybe this is kind of part of that process. Maybe these, third and fourth bullet points are kind of a little more intertwined than this slide, can show. But as you're doing that, you want to, have a plan for how are we going to map our content from the D6 site to D8. Because now they could potentially have two very different information architectures. But figure that out and then build custom migrations based on that mapping. So in your head say, well, in Drupal 6 we had a widget content type. In Drupal 8 we've got a product content type. So we want to migrate the widget, nodes of type widget into nodes of type product, and maybe the fields aren't exactly the same, but we want this field to go there, and that field to go here, and this field to be combined with that other field, and go, so you have to figure out all of those mappings. And then you build all of those mappings into your custom migrations, and then you run them. And granted, this takes a bit more time than the other methods, obviously, but the end result is you've got a Drupal 8 site that you can be proud of. And that has the information architecture that will allow you to move forward and take advantage of all the great new things that are available for Drupal 8. So visually, this is what it looks like to me, where everything's custom. You get to pick the migrations that are going to be run, and you basically customize them every step of the way. And it seems scary right now, but I will definitely show you in the example we're about to go through that a lot of times, writing one of these migrations, there's no PHP involved. It's all just a YAML file. It's all just writing a configuration file. All right, so let's do a live demo, which is always dangerous. I just practiced it this morning, so I think we're good, but who knows? Stuff can go sideways. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move some content from an actual Drupal 6 site into Drupal 8, and we're going to make a couple tweaks, as we go. What are we going to do? Well, here, first of all, I'll just show you. Let me, I want to minimize that. There we go. So, hey, here's the old Drupal Easy site. This is built on Drupal 6, and this is locally. I have it running locally on acquainted desktop. So what we're going to do, and, well, here, similarly, I've got a Drupal 8 site. A fresh, brand new Drupal 8.2.3 or 2, whatever the latest version of core is. So brand new Drupal 8 site. I've got the admin toolbar installed, but not much more. So what do we want to do? Well, we have a bunch of data in our Drupal 6 site that is in the audio content type. In Drupal 8, I want to call that podcast. So we're basically going to migrate nodes of type audio to nodes of type podcast. We're going to change a field name. In Drupal 6, we had a field called field embed. And in Drupal 8, I want that to be field audio URLs. I want to keep an existing text format. So in Drupal 6, I used a markdown filter, which is a module. It's available for Drupal 8 as well. But it's a custom text format. So I want to make sure that when I move these nodes of type audio, which the vast majority of them use as text format, when I get to Drupal 8 and looking at podcast nodes, they're still using this markdown format. So not a whole lot of tweaks, but we have 23 minutes left, so I can't do too terribly much. So this is our plan. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to build our Drupal 8 site and configure it, which I've already done just to save time, so I'll show you that in a second, what I've done. Then we're going to create a custom migration, which again I've already done, but I'm going to walk you through the code. And all the code's available on GitHub. And then we're going to run that custom migration. So that's our plan. I see Todd Barker has a question. Could Drush migrate upgrade configure only be used to migrate config from a lower environment from dev to task to prod as a way to automate moving config up through environments, or should features be used to do that? I'm going to say neither, Todd. You should be using the configuration system to do that. Maybe there might be some crazy way you could do it with migrate upgrade configure only, but that seems like you're taking the long way. Someone's giving you a lovely cooked dinner in the configuration system, and you're choosing to go out and plant potatoes and start that way. I would say, the configuration system's the way to do that, Todd. Okay, so here's our plan. So let me see. I don't know how many more. I always forget how many more slides I have before I'm. All right, so here's what we did to set up the site. I installed a fresh Drupal 8.2. You can see I updated this site this morning. Used the standard installation profile. I enabled the following modules. So admin toolbar, markdown, and libraries. So libraries is a dependency of markdown, as well as migrate tools and migrate plus. So nothing crazy here. I manually configured a new text format. So I'll show that to you. So go to content authoring, text formats and editors. I did this all before the webinar started. Here's our new markdown text format. Nothing, out of the ordinary here. Here's the markdown enabled filter. I put them in the right order. I created a new content type. So this is where, this is the big win, I think, is where we get to define our information architecture on the D8 site the way it needs to be. So this is a very simple one. It's the podcast content type. And I added a new field of type link for our audio URLs. I think that's it. Whoops. Yeah, that's it. So, so let's look at the code here and look at how this actually gets put together. If you're interested, this is the URL. I will put this URL, let's see. How can I do this? I'm going to get out of presenter view here. There we go. Okay, so the code for what I'm about to show you, and I'll put all this in the chat. The code for what I'm about to show you is here. And full details on this, I actually wrote a blog post about this demo as well. So all kinds of links there. Okay, so let me close this out because now we're going to move fully into the live demo portion. I do have a question from Devaraj. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. Can we migrate cross-entity migration like in D6, it's content type, and D8, it's a block type? Can we achieve this? Yes. Yes, and we'll see, and actually, I'll leave this question up because I'll show you kind of how to achieve this in a second as we walk through our custom module. Okay, so let me close this out. So we'll go right to the code. I've written a small custom module. So it lives, inside my modules directory. I've created a custom directory. I called it DE6 migrate, and this is the link on GitHub, or this is the code on GitHub I just provided for you. Did I put both those in there? Oh, hold on. I realized I didn't put this, I didn't put the GitHub in there. Let me see. Let me get this one in there for you. I think I duplicated the other one. Copy. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So it's a module, so it needs a .info file. So .info file, pretty straightforward. We've got a couple dependencies on Migrate Drupal and Migrate Plus. We need a dependency on Migrate Drupal because we are using some of the Migrate Drupal classes. So this is the core module that knows how to talk to older Drupal sites. And we need Migrate Plus because custom migrations are all going to derive from Migrate Plus. Okay, so nothing really up our sleeve there. And then notice There's no src directory. There's no .module file. So there is no PHP in this custom module. Rather, as promised, our migrations are all about configuration. So we have a couple of configuration files. And they're in /config/install, which means when we enable this module, these configurations get installed into the active config. And then at that point, all we have to do is run the migration by name. So it becomes pretty simple in a second. And we have two, even though we're really only migrating one content type, I could have done this with only one, but I think it's really valuable to see the group one. So I actually created a migration group. And this is a way to basically group multiple migrations together. And the point of doing this is that the group actually defines the source database. All right, so again, this is YAML. So it's kind of a lot of metadata here right now, but just follow me for a second. So we're basically defining a new group. We're calling it Drupal Easy 6 or DE6. As ID, the label Drupal Easy 6 content. The description is podcast posts. If there was more than one migration in here, I might call this, migration, configurations for Drupal Easy 6 site, something like that. The source type is Drupal 6. And then this is really the important bit, shared configuration. And basically what this is saying is any migrations that are part of this group can get access to this data. So what does this mean? Source, key, legacy? Well, it's kind of a fancy way of basically saying that this migration group, the source database, has a key of legacy. And if we look at our settings.php file for our Drupal 8 site, so this is just a normal site's default settings.php. Here is our Drupal 8. Here's our Drupal 8 database information. So this is the database for our actual, where did it go? I lost my site. Did I minimize? Oh yeah, it's over here. I couldn't find it there for a second. There we go. So this is the database connection information for our D8 site. This is the database configuration information for our legacy site, for our Drupal 6 site. So this database key of legacy, that's where this comes from. So if for some reason, if I change this to, I have it, I'm not going to bother with it, but if I change this to some other, if I called this Drupal Easy 6, then I would have to call this Drupal Easy 6. So this is what ties this group to this particular database. And then going back, I know there was a question earlier about via proxy, connecting to a D6 database via proxy. If you can connect via proxy using, this type of array, then the answer is yes. So I've never had to do that. I forget what your name was who asked the question. I apologize. But if you can connect to your legacy database by defining it in your settings.php, then the answer is going to be yes. So, okay. So that's the group. The group, all it does is basically just provides a bucket for us to put other migrations into and share information. And in this case, information that it's sharing is just the credentials for the legacy database. All right, so let's get to the fun part, our actual migration. So remember, we've got a source, we've got a destination, and we've got our pipeline. So that's, and we're going to keep coming back to this image for a few times. How are we on time? 15 minutes, plenty of time. We're going to keep coming back to this image as we look at our configuration file. Let's look at this stuff up here, up top. Just metadata for our configuration. So we have to give it unique ID, so DE6 audio. We give it a label, give it a migration tag of Drupal 6, a deriver, and basically this migration is the deriver, or the thing that generates this type of migration is the D6 node deriver. And I don't want to get too far into these details So I'm just going to gloss over those literally, but let's talk about migration group. This is what puts this migration into this bucket, is by defining the migration group right here. And then let's look at this in sections. We have a source section. We have a process section. And we have a destination section. So destination, source, and then the middle part is our pipeline. So let's talk about source and destination first, since those are the shortest. We're basically, we're going to use the built-in Drupal 6 source plugin that already exists. This is part of the Migrate Drupal module. So all we're doing here is basically saying our source for this migration is a Drupal 6 node, and this is provided to us by the Migrate Drupal module. Specifically, we want it to filter by node type. We only want audio nodes. So with these 3 lines right here, we are basically saying, okay, migration, go get me all of the audio nodes in the Drupal 6 database. And this D6 node class, it knows the query that it needs to run against this database to get all of those nodes. So these 3 lines basically take care of our source. Similarly, these 2 lines take care of our destination. These 2 lines basically say, at the very end of the pipeline, stick all of this data into a node. And all of this data is going to be provided. This data is going to tell us the type and the language and the title and all that stuff. And at the very end, create a node out of it. So, Devaraj, hopefully I'm saying your name right, this is your answer. If you want to take audio nodes from a source, you can put them in any type of destination you want. Granted, your process is going to be a little bit different, because if you're saving this as an entity block, then your fields for blocks are going to be a little bit different than your fields for nodes. But I don't think you're going to need any custom code, custom PHP. You're going to have to customize your YAML file, obviously. Okay, so hopefully I think I answered that question. I've got a couple other questions. Let me run through these right now. So Roberto, can I put more than one node type? That's a great question, and I do not know the answer. I am going to guess that the answer is going to be no. I don't think you can do something like this. I will say that, an easy way to find out is to just basically look up the source plugin. It's all on api.drupal.org. And if we have time at the end, we only have 10 minutes left. I don't know if we're going to have time, but if we have time at the end, I'll look it up. I'll show you where to do that. But I'm going to guess the answer is no. You'd probably have to create 2 migrations that are basically identical other than the node type, is what I would guess. And let's see, Therese, should users have been migrated before content to have content connected to the correct user? Oh, Therese, you're very clever. So here, spoiler alert, we're gonna kind of jump ahead into the process a little bit. I do cheat a little bit right here, Therese, where I set the user ID of all of these nodes to 1. So I'm not actually carrying over users, just for ease of simplicity. So technically you did say should users have been migrated first. So I'll say yes, they should have been. But for this example, to keep it short, I didn't. So, all right, I'm going to answer Suzanne's question, and that's the last one until I finish this, so I make sure I get through it. Yes. Is there a way to migrate WordPress site to Drupal 8? There absolutely is. There's actually a contributed module. I don't know what maybe beta version right now, that provides a source plugin type for WordPress sites. So if you go on Drupal.org, I'm sure you can find it. Just do a search for Drupal 8 WordPress migrate, maybe. Should come up. Okay, you are welcome. Okay, so let's get through this process. Running the migration is going to take about 2 minutes, so I've got a few minutes here. So we talked about source, we talked about destination. Let's talk about the middle part now. So the way that the process section works is we give the destination field, and let's look at a simple one. Let's look at the title. the value of the destination field is going to be this source field. So this is kind of a one-to-one right here. So we're basically going to take the title field from the source and map that to the title field of the destination. So we're not going to modify it. We're not going to do anything funky. We're basically just going to map the title field on the source to the title field of the destination. But as you can see, not all of them are one-to-one. I mean, these are all one-to-one right here. So status goes to status. These are nice, easy ones. But we do have a bunch that aren't one-to-one. First of all, let me mention that if I were to uncomment these, then we'd actually be migrating the node and version IDs over as well, revision IDs. So by keeping these commented out, our nodes are going to get new IDs on the D8 site. And there are pros and cons for doing this or not doing this, which I don't have enough time to get into. I will say the Drupal core upgrade path, these are uncommented. So that when you run the Drupal core, the whole enchilada, you want to make sure that's on an absolutely fresh D8 site. Okay, so for the type, we know, I kind of specified that we wanted to change our content type from audio to podcast. So if I had done something like this, this would have taken the value of the type on the source and set it equal to the value of the type on the destination. So it would have made the destination type audio as well. But we don't want that. We want the destination type to be podcast. So we have to use what's called a process plugin. And there's a number of really useful process plugins that are part of Drupal core. This one is just the default value process plugin. And what does this do? Well, it provides a default value. So, and that default value is specified on the next line. So what does this mean? This means that basically the value of the type on the destination is going to be equal to the, it's going to use the default value plugin with the default value of podcast. So in effect, this is going to set all of our nodes to have a type of podcast. So our language code, kind of similar, it's using the default value, but we're going to set the language to undefined. The same goes kind of for the user ID that I cheated before. I think, was it Suzanne who called me out on it? But that's all right, I'll take it. I made it a little bit easier on myself. The body format, again, this is where I'm able to set the default text format for the body field to Markdown. You can see the fields in Drupal 8 are a little bit different. They're kind of like it's a subfield there. So the value part of the body field is just going to be mapped from the body field on D6. And then finally, so I'm going to just skip down to the bottom so I finish here in the next 5 minutes. We're going to take the field embed field from our Drupal 6 site. It's a CCK link, so we have a plugin that knows how to handle these fields. And we're going to map it to the field audio URLs field in Drupal 8. And we have no dependencies on this migration. If I was going to map users, then we would have to have a dependency here for the user migration. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So the first thing I have to do is I have to install my module. I'm going to use Drupal console for this. It's DE6 migrate. And these are just PHP notices I always get on my local. I really should clean those up one of these days, but. All right, so we got that installed, rebuilding caches. And I'm going to do all this on the command line because it's really the best way to do it. But the commands, the drush commands that Migrate Tools provides are identical to the migrate commands from D7. So we can do a drush migrate status, or drush ms is its alias, and ignore all of these crazy PHP notices. Here's the output. So we can see that here's our DE6 audio, DE6 audio migration. We've got 172 nodes on the source. None of them have been imported. So we can do a drush migrate import, which is drush mi as an alias, DE6 audio, and this will run the migration for us. And again, ignore all my PHP notices. And there you go, processed, 172 created, 0 updated, 0 failed, 0 ignored, done. I can do the migrate status again. We can see they've all been imported. I can go to my Drupal 8 site and go to content. And be very patient. And there we go. We have all of our podcast content. If we edit any one of them, we see our title, our body is there, our text format is correct, our URLs came through just fine. And if we view it, it's laid out according to the way that we have the markdown text in there, and we have a URL that actually is pointing to an MP3 correctly. So there you go. Here, one last thing just to show you. We could also do a drush migrate rollback, just like in Drupal 7, drush mr, de6 audio, and that will roll them all back. I have less than a minute. Clock's ticking. I got one question up there. Okay, so we come back here, go to content. We'll see that nothing's there anymore, and the content's gone. Okay, Devraj, 2 questions. For multilingual content, UND will be, okay, I will admittedly, I'm not super strong on multilingual. I believe that if you have a D6 multilingual site, you're not actually going to be using the default value plugin. You're going to be migrating the value for the language code in. So you're not going to use the default value plugin. It's going to be lang code and then map from some other field. I believe that's the answer to that. If we have media module in D7, how will it be handled in migration for content replacing token? Great question. The right answer, and I don't know, I haven't followed the media initiative all that closely, is the media module in D8 ideally will provide source plugins to migrate content from previous versions of the media module in. If it doesn't, then you'll have to do some manual stuff. I have a feeling, though, enough people use the media module where that will kind of, that will be solved at some point, and it may already be solved. I don't know, but the goal is that for modules in Drupal 8 to provide their own migration source plugins and process plugins if need be. But the source plugin is really the important part, because remember, the source plugin that contains the information for knowing how to get the data out of the source database. It knows the queries it needs to run on the source database to get the information out. Siddhartha, how about custom table content created in an old D6 site? Again, well, it goes back to the source plugin. You can write a custom source plugin. I actually am working on another blog post that does something very similar. But you can write a source plugin. They're actually, if you look at the code for a source plugin, it's not that bad. It's an object, but it has a query method where you just have to define the query. So you define the query that gets the data out of the source, and then those fields are available to you, in your process. So it's not terrible at all. Okay, let's see. Okay, Devraj. Ed, is there a good way you can figure out what should be the correct order of migration groups during the migration process? Ed, that's a great question. I guess the best answer to that is I would look at how the Whole Enchilada does it. Because remember, the Whole Enchilada, that's migrating field bases, field instances, field widgets, field formatters. So that's kind of already been solved there. If you're talking more about figuring out the dependencies for your own information architecture, that's something that you just kind of have to really understand your own information architecture. And unfortunately, in Drupal, it's possible to create information architecture that's circular dependencies. in which case then you've got to take advantage kind of the migrate stubbing that someone mentioned earlier, which I'm not going to get into, but it's a way to kind of create a stub for a piece of content in one migration, and then have another migration come back and finish populating that stub. So, okay, Cigar. After migration, if more content is added in D6 site, then how to get newly added content? I am doing this exactly the way I'm doing this for a project, and literally all you have to do is just every few weeks I get a fresh copy of the source database, and I just rerun migrate import. And it's smart enough where it will only migrate in the new nodes. Now, the one thing it won't do yet, although it might do it now, I haven't updated that migration in a while. There's the idea of the high water field in Drupal 7 that looks at anything that's changed since a particular high water point or date, and then it will re-migrate those nodes. I think that might be into migrate now. I'm not 100% sure. But theoretically, I mean, I do it on a site where I just rerun migrate import, and it just migrates in the new stuff. Boris, how would you organize YAML files for fairly complex migration, multiple miles, multiple groups? That's a great question. I haven't done anything that's had more than like a dozen or so migrations. I've always kept them in one module, in one group, very flat. I don't, that's a really good question. I don't have a straight answer for you, Anna. I'm sorry. I think I would tend to not change the way I'm doing it until I had a reason to change. I would have to have a really good reason to change it, and I can't think of what a good reason would be. Maybe if there were multiple source databases involved, then I would consider doing it in multiple modules, definitely multiple groups at that point. Interesting question, though. So I'm sorry I don't have something more definitive. Let's see. Ed, can you please explain what you mean by doing it automatically? What's the drush command? You don't need the migration groups supplied in the command. I'm not sure what you're...
That's in reference to something I've put, because he asked about the order of migration. If you actually use drush, it will do it in the order required, rather than you having to tell it. Ed, if you put your email in there, I'll send you a little sample code thing which should explain it all for you. And we might put it on with the D8-day stuff as well, just for clarity.
Cool. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so I think the answer is, well, just to add on to what Daniel said, I should say, if you add dependencies into a migration configuration, then the migrate module will use those dependencies to determine the proper order that the migration should run in. So the order is not set, well, no, let me rephrase that. If you put a dependency in here, like on user, and we try and run this migration, and the user migration hasn't been run, the migrate module won't let us do it. It'll say, hey, you can't do this unless you run the user migration first. So drush, the migrate import command will check to make sure all the dependencies have been migrated first. So maybe that makes things a little bit more clear. Okay, Robert, have you ever done a migration that brought in content and put it in the book module structure? I have not done one of those yet. I actually worked on some book module code way back when I first started getting involved in migrating core. I can't imagine it's too terribly different. It should be fairly straightforward mapping from what I remember. I don't think the book module information architecture has changed all that much between 6 and 7 and 8.
Yeah, it should be very similar to standard content type, I do believe, from what I know.
Okay, good. All right, thank you for that, Daniel. And Jose, what are the different use cases between feeds and migrate? Oh, it's a question I love because I'm a big fan of the feeds module. I don't think feeds, I'll check real quick. I don't think feeds is completely baked yet for D8. Um, I I guess in my head, let me see. Yeah, there's a dev. Well, it's got some activity last month, but um, I tend to look at the feeds module like as something that I use for a site that's already built and live and up and running. And then I will use the feeds module. And this is just me. This is just me talking here. Um, I tend not to use the feeds module to migrate initial content in. I love the migrate module, so I tend to use the migrate module for stuff like that. But once the site's up and running, I've got a little mental switch for some reason that says, okay, well, now the site's live, I need to bring stuff in. Um, I'm going to use the feeds module because generally in those circumstances, once the site's live, I'm not bringing in more content from an old Drupal site. I'm bringing in content from a CSV or from some custom database or something. Um, hopefully that answers your question, Jose. That's kind of where I come from, or what goes through my head when I'm deciding between the two. And for me, it's never really a decision. It's just kind of, new project, new site, use migrate. Existing project, existing site, use feeds. It's kind of the way I look at it.
All right, that looks like it was the last one. Does anyone have any final questions for Mike?
Thank you, Hyson. Seems like we have a very worldly crowd today. That's great. That's fun.
It's very intimidating trying to say people's names. I've
Yeah,
discovered
really,
lately.
really tested my name pronunciation skills.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for volunteering your time, Mike, to make this doable, and hopefully everyone enjoyed the session.
Yeah, Andy, I think I have to now. Been talking about food for a few minutes now. I might have to make a run to a taco place.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.